So last class we went up to 1952, but I'm gonna backtrack a little bit and return to 1949 because we find some interesting document that I've shared already with Pastor Hector in the archives, and we'll take it up to the 60s today. I think 60s is probably the most interesting decade that I'm covering, so I'm looking forward to sharing what I learned with you all. So we will go over.
We need you over here.
Where? In the circle here.
Right here.
Thank you for.
He has a question to ask you after this.
No.
About money.
Ooh. Thank you for completing the circle, or almost. So today we'll go over 4 pastorates: Pastor Holmgren, Russell, Haynes, and Gingerich. Yes, and then I'm sorry. Is it? And then we'll also kind of. No, I'm trying to contextualize this in broader modern Japanese history. So we'll talk about the post-war economic boom. The economists called it the economic miracle, and that phrase kind of stuck. And then we'll also talk about the counterculture, the turbulent 60s. And then we'll wrap up with West Tokyo Union Church, our founding of. And Pastor Jonathan said he will join us later during the class and tell us more about how their history relates to what they're doing today. So Leighton Holmgren was a pastor. If you remember, I ended the last class with a rededication service of 1952, and he was the acting pastor. He presided over that service because he served us as an acting pastor during the years of Reconstruction, during the years of occupation. And if you see this document here, I don't know if you can read it, but this is a kind of letterhead of Pastor Russell, which we'll talk about shortly. And then Pastor Russell says that Dr. Holmgren led in the development of the church from a small group meeting in a gutted shell of a building to a vigorous congregation with a beautifully rebuilt place of worship. So he played a formative role in the rebuilding of our church after the war. And then before then, he was born in Minnesota. He was a Methodist, and he studied in the U.S. and Scotland, and he had a PhD also. And then before he came to Tokyo, he was a minister at Christ Church. It's a big Methodist church in New York, and he was actually sent by them as a minister abroad, which I think is generous of them. And he comes to Japan as a professor. He comes to Keio, and he teaches at another university too. And then he also serves as an advisor to foreign ministry. And in 1952, he leaves Japan after 3 years at TUC, but he returns in the 1960s and 80s to preach. And then he also served as a board chair in addition to being a pastor. I don't know how many people have held both roles in our history. And then what does he do? And this is him leaving for the Philippines in 1952. I'm sorry?
What does it mean, acting pastor and board chair?
Oh, he was because I don't think our.
Which board?
Oh, I think the church board.
Council.
The council. Yeah, I think they called it.
Acting pastor is the board chair.
It is? Oh, I thought it meant I thought it's Pastor Hector and Catherine's job together.
According to the Constitution.
Oh.
senior pastor
He
is
moderates
pastor.
Oh.
and is in charge of this.
Admin is chaired.
Admin is a chair.
President, and the council is chaired by the pastor. But this may be a different board.
But I think the title, I mean, it's in my later slide, but I think that we have this constitutional revision, and then board becomes the council. So I think it might have been separate roles. I think it might have been separate roles back then. So
But he's non-voting. He's a non-voting chair. So we don't know what the meaning is.
Sorry.
okay. No, it's good. No, thank you. And then what does he do after? I think it's remarkable what he does after. He joins the American Bible Society. I didn't really know what they do, but he joins firstly as the secretary for Asia, and then a year after he joins the society, he sends us a bunch of Bibles. It's in our archive. And then 1963 to 74, he serves as a general secretary for this organization. And then under his tenure, so their mission is to distribute Bibles across the world. And then their kind of supplies goes from 13 million Bibles in 40 countries to 300 million Bibles in 180 countries. So he kind of becomes like a superstar in this Bible world. And then this is him meeting the Pope. I think it's John Paul II, right? And then this is him meeting President Carter, Jimmy Carter. And
Talk about he survived by his companion.
yeah, so there are obituaries of him in the New York Times and the LA Times. And this is how the obituary ends. Dr. Holmgren is survived by his companion of 30 years, Kiyoshi Hagiya. So I didn't make much of this statement. I was just thought, oh, he must have not gotten married for whatever reason. But I saw in the archive, I think Wally went through the archives and he kind of cataloged them and left some comments. And then Wally wrote, "This is a man's name." So I started asking questions, and then Pastor Hector and I were wondering, speculating if he was kind of in the closet. So he might have been the first queer pastor at TUC. So that's I mean, we won't know for sure. But this gentleman also donated a tree at ICU in honor of Dr. Holmgren. And then it says from a friend. So, but yeah, if they were together for 30 years, so I guess they might not have been together when he was in Tokyo, because he lived long. He lived till just passed away 20 years ago. And so, yeah, I mean, bunch of TUC pastors live long. I learned. Yeah. Any questions or? Yeah, any of these, I think, especially as we enter history that you've lived, feel free to comment or raise questions.
Can I ask?
Yes.
Was he close with MacArthur? Because it seems like, the division of church and state, that he was an advisor to the foreign ministry. What, do you know anything?
Oh, I think it might have been foreign ministry to Japan rather than SCAB, rather than to MacArthur. Yeah.
But it's kind of unusual to have a pastor of the church to be advisor to the foreign ministry.
Right.
And what was he a professor of?
Oh, I think.
Sorry. What was he a professor of at KO, and how did that relate to his role as advisor to the foreign ministry of Japan?
I think the department he was in, just make the mic there, was called International Studies. And I think he taught courses like Christian Foundations of Democracy. So I think there were, I think the Japanese foreign ministry was interested more kind of in the intersection between Christianity and then as they're trying to transition from wartime kind of economy and then government to a more democratic government. I think they were interested in seeing how Christianity can fit in. I mean, it goes back to...
I don't think he has a position with the ministry, just an advisor to the foreign ministry.
Yeah. And then that kind of goes back to our first one of our founders of the church too, right? He was very involved with what's his name? He's buried in Ayoma Cemetery. He was very involved with Meiji Restoration, and he was a kind of the one, the Dutch Reformed one. What's his name? The famous Ayoma founders. Do you remember? Rashar is much later, but he's buried in Ayoma Cemetery. Do you remember his name? Yeah. Anyways.
Tell us next.
Yeah, there's a history of, I think, especially in the early history of TUC pastors getting involved in the politics of the. Yeah. Oh, you met Holmgren's daughter.
Actually, it's not a biological daughter, but she told me my, father used to be a pastor of TUC. I didn't remember the name, but should be Layton because he spread the Bible all over the world.
Yeah.
Met the many presidents back in U.S. And
Right.
that daughter used to work for the nursery when my son Luke was 5 years old. So it's
that's
almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
She didn't mention details, but she called him as my father.
Oh wow.
So she was related to somehow to TUC after that,
I
and
see.
couldn't speak English. So I recommended to be a nursery staff, and she did it for maybe a couple of years.
Wow. Okay.
Now I know.
Yeah.
the name.
Wow. Cool. Thank you. And I think to understand what's going on at TUC, I think we kind of need to know what's going on in broader Japan, right? And then, so between 1950 and 1973, I guess beginning from after, during the early years of the occupation, there were proposals to completely deindustrialize Japan. You know, it was kind of a punitive measure against, and then it's supposed to be these four allied nations, the UK, France, China, and the US, that governs post-war Japan. But it de facto turns out to be the US calling all the shots. And then, so between these years, Japan's GNP grows by more than 10% every year. And then they struggled during the early years, but it was the Korean War that was a big boost to Japanese economy. And then the Prime Minister Yoshida actually calls the Korean War a gift from the gods for Japanese economy. And then the global economy is also growing at 5% per annum during this time, which is why you get more expats coming into Tokyo. Right? And then by 1973, Japan's global gross national product was the third largest in the world. And you can kind of see the way Japan catches up to Europe, and then still has a while to go to catch the US. But by 1975, Japan's economy is bigger than that of Germany, France, or the UK. Right? And then, do you know about the three sacred regalia of the emperor? It's the sword, shield, and sword, mirror, and then some jewelry. I don't know what. I think it's supposed to represent wisdom, courage, and something else. Yeah, and then people during this time in the 50s and Japanese pundits joke about the three sacred regalia of modern life. And they say you need a TV, washer, and a refrigerator. And then by the 1960s, 90% of the Japanese have them. And you know, there is no limit to our desires and needs and wants, right? And then after Japanese people got these, they talk about the three new regalia of the three C's. Everybody needs a car, a cooler, an AC, and a color TV. And then this was a car that became hugely popular in the 1960s. Nissan releases it. It's called Sunny. They do a big survey of the nation, of the consumers, to ask what do you want the car to be called, and Sunny becomes a name. And that kind of becomes a symbol of the middle class. And during this time, you have this, like, I guess, baby boomer birth. Almost 3 million babies are born every year during the, after the war. And then in the 50s and 60s, you also have about 1 million people leaving the countryside to come into the city every year, which adds tremendously to the population of Tokyo, right? You have this construction of the suburbs. And then so between 1950 and 1975, the percentage of urban population grows from 38% to 75%, which is about doubling. And but because population is also rising, the rural population kind of remains the same. And then you also have this rise of Japanese tourists. You know, in 1960, there were only about 120,000 Japanese tourists who left the country. But by 1970, this number becomes 1 million. So there's growing exchange between Japan and the world. And 1964 is when the Shinkansen begins service between Tokyo and Osaka. Also, yes. Do you mind? Yeah, thank you.
Wally Higgins-san used to be advisor for Kokutetsu JR. Did you know that?
Yeah, I heard about
So
that.
he ride on the first trip from Tokyo to Osaka by Kodama
Oh, he did.
Shinkansen
Oh, wow.
as an advisor.
He was on that train.
So he used to live in Shizuoka and come to Tokyo for TUC worship service.
Yeah.
But I remember that he had the JR pass to go back and forth.
Oh.
No, really? Okay, but yeah.
No,
He had a
Joanne
pass,
and I
special.
visited Wally a month ago maybe, and then I got 2 books he wrote about Japanese railways, and I was told he used to commute 3 hours one way to come to church twice a week, So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how he did that. So yeah, and then so against this backdrop, we have the first pastor that we call after the war, Galen Russell. He was a congregational minister. They're kind of a reformed, kind of Presbyterian tradition from Connecticut. And he kind of has a rough beginning in his pastorate. He moves 5 times during his first year. Yeah, I think we were not as prepared to host a pastor as we were expecting, perhaps. So yeah, he begins at the American school in Japan. And he moves to Waseda. He lives in the Student Christian Union. And then during the summer, he goes to Nojiri. So I guess his summer home's not bad. And then TUC prepares a permanent home for him in Shinjuku. So yeah.
Bought the property
Bought the property in Shinjuku, and then we sold it to buy West Union.
So this is the time we bought.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, and then when he comes, we used to be primarily a missionary church, right? Hello. Yeah. Oh, that may be better to see the slides. Yeah. Oh, now that you're here, we need to remember to end our meeting with a prayer. Sorry, I was gonna begin with a prayer, but technology at the beginning is confusing. So, and then so 1952, when he comes in, is when we begin our morning service, and then our first morning service is at 11 a.m. And
Before that, what had it been?
it was 4 p.m. because most of our congregants were missionaries, so they were serving different churches, and that. Yeah, and then this is when we become a church for everybody more. And in 1953, November 29th, in our history book, which goes up to 1980, it says we got 60 new members on one Sunday, and that was the record, one-day record for most number of members, not only visitors but members. So this really was a boom time in our history. And 1954, we joined the National Christian Council of Japan. And then that year is the second General Assembly of the World Council of Churches. I showed a little video from it maybe a month ago during our Communion Sunday. This was a gathering, when I went, it was a gathering of more than 200 denominations from 100 countries, representing more than 500 million Christians. So, and then ecumenical movement begins after World War II as a way for Christians to foster peace. And this was a second General Assembly in Evanston, Illinois, after the first General Assembly in Amsterdam. So our pastor gets to go. I hope, Pastor Hector, you get to go to the General Assembly, the next one. And then 1954, we also have the publishing of this famous book. Probably the most, I should have brought a copy, it's in the archive. Have any of you seen this?
What is it?
Buy It and Try It. It's a cookbook written by the Women's Society at Tokyo Union Church. And this, you can still buy it on Amazon, but it's like $100 though, so I'll just, you can come to the archive and then, but apparently this was really popular. And then Pastor Hector, you showed me a video of talking about this, right? Oh, you have a copy of that book.
I think I have a copy of that book up at my Nojiri cabin.
It's in Nojiri? Okay.
What was it like? Because I see a picture of the daikon. It's like how to make a daikon.
Yeah.
Is this American?
Yeah, so it's American cooking.
Very helpful with using Japanese
Ingredients. Yeah, so it'd be the professor, I believe he was the chair at Harvard, goes and talks about this and actually points to this as kind of like the early expat life in Tokyo, Japan. And it's like how bewildered housewives, how can they possibly cook a casserole entering... right. So it's an example. It's an example of like what can you do at a Japanese grocery store, name how it looks like to make kind of recipes that you would eat back home stateside.
All the recipes have a name of the TUC member who contributed it. And then this would also go into a Japanese edition also. So it's not, it becomes kind of a hit. And then,
It's only for the
okay. And then 1954, we also have the tragedy of the sinking of a ferry around Hakodate in northern Japan, which kills more than 1,000. And then, and then 2 TUC members die from that accident also. And then for a decade after every Sunday service or during every Sunday service on the kind of a death anniversary, we have flowers and then friends and then memorial for those 2 who are departed. And then during this time, we also lend our church sanctuary to the Chinese Christian church and then the German Evangelical Church, which was a German-speaking congregation. And eventually, they all build their own sanctuaries, but we help them get started. And then when so this is Reverend Russell, and this is his family. When they first arrived in Tokyo, they came by boat. I guess they weren't flying so much back then in 1952. I think this was the memorial service I was talking about. And by the time he leaves, there's a article in the local newspaper. It didn't say which newspaper, but it says, "The manse, which has been a refuge and a source of sociality for hundreds, is noted for hospitality." So.
And so they did the live stream already in 54 and we can COVID. No, it's just there.
What was the live stream?
It says live stream.
Yeah, but what does that mean?
Live stream. I think it's just like a cool.
In 1950, what does live stream mean?
Oh, I think it was just an illustration. I think he was talking about the different ministry. You see, like the finance committee here, and there's like the men's group, and then the. Yeah, I think this was kind of visual representation of the rally day. I mean, I kind of put the book there, but it was kind of colorful. You should. I was telling Pastor Hector we should have we have a lot of beautiful pictures in our archives, and I think especially from the 50s onwards, a lot of beautiful black and white photos that some of which have duplicate copies. So I think we can definitely exhibit them, or we have a high quality scanner also. So, yeah, and then this was kind of an interesting article I saw. So this was the governor of the Central Bank of Japan joining the men's breakfast group at TUC. And then he was the first Japanese ambassador to the U.S. after the war. So yeah, he was a prominent individual, and he served as a governor of the Bank of Japan twice. So, and then he says that Japanese lack religious consciousness. So I guess those were the kind of and this is Pastor Russell here, I guess. And this is just this is our annual report. And then I think the graphic seems a little Sunday school to me, but I also loved our stamp that we had. So this was the 50s, and then the next pastor is Reverend Haynes. He was a Presbyterian minister who had served as an army chaplain during World War II, and then he was a pastor in New York State for many years before coming here. And then 1956, we have a Thanksgiving Eve joint service with St. Albans Anglican Church. I don't know if we have much interaction with them these days, but back then. And then the following year, we went to St. Albans Anglican Church for a service. So that was a little tradition we had. And then 1958 is when we have the constitutional revision that we're talking about. And then the chair of the board becomes the president of the congregation. So the title changes, and then the church council is formed with 12 elders and 10 stewards. And I think we downsize our council after that, right? It's not as big now. Yeah?
Going back to the previous statement. If you interpret it back, that pastor was really pastor and president.
Yeah, pastor
He had
and
the two
president.
roles
Yeah,
of
he had two. I
pastor.
think he has.
That's why it was surprising.
Yeah,
Not-
I think there were just so few people then, because people are not allowed to come back at once during the occupation. And then, and as our church grows, 1959, we call an assistant pastor, and he was Albert Houston, and he was from a Church of the Brethren, which is a pacifist church tradition along with Mennonites and Quakers. And then in 1963, we moved towards 3 services, and then briefly, we actually moved to 4 services a day, 9, 10:30, noon, and 4 p.m. And so, did you have your hand up? Yes.
It only relates to the recording. That was
Okay, say 1956, this Thanksgiving Eve joint service. This is a Thanksgiving service that time? Thanksgiving service that
I think there
time?
was a Thanksgiving service also.
Oh, I see.
I mean, you will see, I'll show kind of statistics from over the congregation during this time, but we had a lot of Americans then.
Well, for family night out, we used to have some sort of Thanksgiving thing in the basement, the fellowship hall.
I was wondering, when you say 4 services, does that mean we have, 200 in our congregation now, something we can seat? Is it about 200 here? Does that mean we filled up 200 seats 4 times? Or did we have that many people coming to church?
I'll show, we have some statistics on the membership that I'll show soon, but I think we had more kind of visitors back then than we used to. And I think membership never exceeded 300-400. But maybe pastors were more diligent back then. I don't know how you do it.
So maybe you're going to address this. Was this some about the rebuilding after the war, and a lot of people were here, or the military was here? Or
Military was here, and then we had the Fort Washington Heights nearby. I'll show a picture of that later, around where Yoyogi Park is now. So, yeah, I mean, this was just a time when, and I think this was a time when after World War II, all across the world, there is a more interest in Christianity. And I think from the 60s onwards, you kind of get more disaffiliation from church. So, and then so this was an second associate pastor. This is not Reverend Houston. And I think this lady was a church secretary. And that's Reverend Haynes here. And then his wife, Grace Haynes, apparently was taught the Empress in English. Yeah, I didn't find much records of that in the archive or online, but then Michiko-san, yeah. So, and then in return, we got these imperial chimes as a memorial gift. I don't know if we have them still somewhere. And then there's also a record of the John Glenn. Does that name ring a bell? He later becomes a senator. Yeah, he was a very... there's a record of him. He was the first American who became an orbiting astronaut. And then he worshiped with us. And then, yeah, these are some numbers I wanted to share with you during... I don't know if you can you probably can't read any of it, right? Oh, you can. Okay. I wish I could zoom in. But I think, look at these Easter numbers. We had 5 services for Easter, and there were 1,000 people who joined us. And then for Christmas Eve service, too, I guess our highest number was, yeah. So, but I'm confused because it says Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So I don't know why. I mean, this is our years here, but we have days. Oh, maybe this is a Tuesday that year, right? Okay. That's how this works. And then this is the membership, church membership here. I can share this. I can share the slides. You don't need to take photos if you want. Come in if you want.
What's the 9/11 for up there?
The
service times. I see.
Yeah. These are the 3 services we had, and then so that's the membership you were asking about, Catherine. The highest is in 1964, and we're at 458. but that was when we had when we were gathering about 170 every year. So the turnover was about a third of the church would leave every year because Tokyo was kind of a transient stop for many foreigners. And then Sunday school enrollment is like really high too. There are more than 300 children enrolled in our Sunday school during the 60s. So these are some pictures from our more than 300 children. Yeah.
Children or Sunday school?
You're just second.
Oh.
So the total number of Sunday school people, does that include children or are those children?
I think they're only children.
Are you sure?
I think this is the adult membership and this is the Sunday school children. Yeah. And then you see little numbers on church finances too. So our budget like grows like the Japanese economy, right? In 1957, our budget is about 5.5 million yen, but by 1964, our budget becomes 15.9 million yen. So you see there's like a breakdown of kind of how many children came to each of but you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So yeah, we had 11 different Sunday school kind of classes. Yeah, we really offered like a full school. Or maybe we should have started a school, because some of like the New York churches, their kind of their nursery and their primary school, their kindergarten becomes a big cash cow for the church. And then if you look at this church membership distribution, you can see that it's still primarily American. In 1955, 70% of the congregation were Americans. In 1959, 80% of the congregation are Americans. So it is, maybe that's part of the reason why we've had so many American pastors over the years. And this is kind of you can kind of assume, so there is a big change in the demographic of the church. During this time, in 1955, 44% of the church were missionaries. By 1959, that's only 22%. So the proportion of missionaries halve. And that is made up by people who work in the embassy, which goes from 4% to 11%, from 55 to 59. And then we get more business people. It was from 31% to 37%. And then the military goes from 9% to 13% of the church between 1955 and 59. And then a lot of the others are teachers. And then the proportion of, I don't know what YP is. Do you know what YP is? Young people. Oh, okay. But like, yeah. So men were. I don't know why they don't give gender of young people, but okay. So there were always more women than men at TUC. So.
Yes, especially American young people.
American young people.
That's on the other, though. That's other.
Yeah. And then during this time, you can see the Japanese members make up about 8% of the congregation. That stays constant. Number of Canadians go from 6% to 5%. Europeans 9% to 4%. So I guess the proportion of Europeans drop, and then there aren't that many congregates from the rest of Asia. What would be a contemporary reference? Oh.
I mean, of all those nationalities.
Well, those categories, US, Canada, and Asia.
I mean, we have a sample right here.
Ask membership.
I think US, Canada, and Europe has dropped to around 30%.
Yeah, and then Asia and Japan and the rest of Asia has grown, and then I guess Africa isn't even up here, but I think we have more.
Sorry, Mike, everybody. I think Peter might actually know about this because you were involved in this. But when the search committee was looking for the pastor, that ended up being Pastor Steve. If I remember looking at the packet correctly, I believe Japanese members consisted, 40% at that time? Yeah, it's about 40% or so. Yeah, so that's obviously a substantial difference from what we see from this number back from the 1950s. Just a little note that I just remembered from that.
Thank you. And I guess these are also kind of a more documents from pastorate of Reverend Haynes. And this was when we were doing the 90th anniversary of the founding of our church in 1962. And it's kind of cool. This was the head of the organizing committee for the anniversary service was the Canadian ambassador to Japan, the Honorable William Bull. So he was very involved with the organizing. I don't know if he was a member, but he was certainly very involved. And then we also have an address by Edwin Reischauer, who was like a Sunday school alum of our church. His father was very involved. His father was an elder of the church, a missionary, and his mother was involved with the building committee of the reconstructing the church. And I saw this cool article. It didn't give the year actually. Sometimes you get these newspaper articles in the archive and you don't have the dates. But I think it's around this time because it talks about the panel that Tokyo Union Church is hosting on the theme of the Christian leaven in the revolutionary lump. And this was with a panel of historians, including Reischauer. And you get a little bio about him here. After attending the American school in Japan and graduating from Oberlin College in 1931, Ambassador Reischauer studied at the University of Paris, Tokyo, Kyoto, and Beijing, and receiving his PhD from Harvard in 1939. In 1961, President Kennedy appointed him U.S. ambassador to Japan. His mother served on the building committee of Tokyo Union Church before the war. No mention of his father serving as an elder for many years. So yeah, I think, and then I guess you can read here, the program is an outgrowth of Tokyo Union's executive committees. This is discussion of the church's responsibility to its members and to the community. I guess we kind of prayed about that today, but then we also hosted discussions about it. The committee discussed the continuing need of the membership to be alert to the changing political and social situations that, I think that's a typo, that might assert Christian opportunity and responsibility. So yeah, I think in the 60s especially, our forefathers were very involved, politically and socially engaged. That was the spirit of the times. So I guess talking of the spirit of the times, I think those who lived in the 60s, what can you tell me about the decade? Just.
I was 5, 6, 7 years old.
There were a lot of communists. Wasn't that when did?
Yeah, Japan was very polarized.
Yeah.
And then I don't think the occupation helped. The U.S. During the military occupiers, there's a prime minister of the Japan who said the occupiers kind of drew the 38th parallel in Japanese psyche. So I think Japan was, the left was kind of suppressed during the war. And then after the war ends, it's kind of similar in Korea. Japan was very polarized, as was in Korea, and then most of the world was very polarized, right? Not only because of the Cold War, but I think internally there were a lot of debates as to how we should do our politics, how our culture should be. So this was kind of Japan in the 1960s. And this is before the 60s, but this incident kind of sets up this like a kind of a popular movement that goes into the 60s. 1954, a Japanese fishing boat, Lucky Dragon 5, gets caught in the fallout from a U.S. atomic test, a hydrogen bomb test at a Bikini Atoll, and a crew member dies from it. And then this kind of sparks a big anti-nuclear movement in Japan, and more than 30 million people sign the petition. And then 1950s and 60s, there's a lot of tension between the U.S. military and then the Japanese people. During this time, there were 48,000 soldiers, U.S. soldiers, across Japan's 4 main islands in hundreds of military installations. And there's another 37,000 in Okinawa. And then there's been more than 100,000 reported crimes involving U.S. Personnel and Japanese citizens, and then more than 500 reported deaths from it. And then many of them are Japanese women who work in bars and massage parlors around bases. So this becomes a big social issue. And then, in 1960, there's a proposal for the U.S. and Japan to form a security treaty. AMPO it's called. Right? And then this is opposed by kind of a leftist students and then women's groups. And then during the signing of this treaty, there are daily protests of hundreds of thousands of Japanese around the Diet. This is a picture from that. And a University of Tokyo student is killed, and Eisenhower was planning a visit, but he sends his press secretary first, and then the crowd of Japanese people surround his car and threaten to overturn it, and then the U.S. has to helicopter him out. So Eisenhower cancels. That was supposed to be the first visit to Japan of a sitting U.S. president. So yeah, there's just a lot of tension during this time, and then as kind of as the Vietnam War ramps up, the U.S. uses kind of Japan as a kind of a staging ground for deploying its troops. So there's a intensifying protest against too. Over 10 million people, Japanese people, protest the Vietnam War across the country. In 1968, there's a huge student strike across. I'm sorry, what? For a year, yeah. The university shuts down for a year. In 1969, Todai does not have an incoming class. So yeah, these were kind of interesting, and this is a picture from the Todai protests. But I'm disappointed to say I don't see much on how our church responded to this time in our archives. I don't know why. Maybe we addressed it through programs or sermons, but in terms of what's survived in the archive, we don't really get a sense that we're embedded in this kind of a political and cultural climate. Yeah. Any questions or anything to add about? Oh, I guess I didn't mention here. I guess another kind of a big event was 1960 during a televised rally. A 17-year-old kind of extremist stabs and kills the chairman of the Japan Socialist Party, who was kind of leading these AMPO protests against the U.S.-Japan security treaty. And this is televised and all this violence, and so this becomes a traumatic event for Japan also. And then the photographer who captured this moment, he wins a Pulitzer. So yeah, these were the times we're in. And then during this time, comes in Pastor Gingerich, and he's a Methodist from Ohio. He's a pastor from 1964 to 67, so he doesn't stay with us long. But he comes during happy times. You know, he comes right in time for the Olympics, 1964 Olympics. Tokyo was supposed to host the Olympics in 1940, but because of the war, it got pushed back to 1964. And there are more than 7,500 athletes from around the world. And then we organized an open house hospitality center because we're near the Olympic Village. The Olympic Village was, and then there were also, we were near the stadium, Yoyogi Stadium. Right? This is a picture from then, and then you can see all the military bases that were in what is now Yoyogi Park. And then this was used as an Olympic village during the Olympics, and then I think afterwards they turned that into a park. And in 1964, the 4 p.m. Afternoon service, we kiss it farewell, and I think that's we've been an afternoon service church since our founding, but it's really, I mean, you saw the demographics, less missionaries, right? We're more church for everybody now. So in 1965, we begin this church newsletter, Faith and Life. In 1960s, so we do a lot of fun things during the 60s too, I think. The Women's Society organizes Tokyo orientation tours for newcomers to Tokyo, I think. And then in 1966, I guess this isn't, we have a memorial service for the ambassador, Joseph Gru. But you may remember that he came up in our last class. He kind of welcomed in the Nisei choir group from TUC during a Christmas party. And I think he was very involved with the church also. His name does come up in our archives. And then there's a plane crash nearby where more than 300 people are killed. And so we host an international, interdenominational service for them also. And then I think 1960s is also a time of kind of liberalization in religions also. In the Catholic Church, you have the Vatican II, which vastly changes interreligious dynamics. And then during this time, we also have a group from a nearby Buddhist temple who comes to learn about our Sunday school program because we had such a thriving Sunday school program and they wanted to learn how we do things. And we also visited, our members also make kind of official visits to a Buddhist temple. And then, there were a lot of new religious movements sprouting after the war. And then we actually make visits to their offices too. So there is a lot of interreligious dialogue and exchange during this time. Services of Unity for 1967 with Protestants and Catholics. Apparently we have these like monks and nuns that come into our sanctuary and worship with us. And I like the World Council of Churches, 1968. We also provide a scholarship for a local Japanese seminarian to attend the World Council of Churches General Assembly in Sweden. So we have deep history with that. This was the only picture I could find of Pastor Gingerich. I couldn't really find a picture of him in our archives. But later on, he goes back to Kansas. He lives till like 95, and this is a picture from his nursing home, and he gets very involved with the Habitat for Humanity after he retires. And he was kind of a civil rights pioneer too. In the Midwest, he hosted a lot of first interracial worship services and started groups before he was at TUC. And my last slide.
Did I see correctly that Mr. Wallace Higgins is
Oh
a
yes,
member
I
of
wanted
the
to
board?
talk about that. This was the first mention of a name of the person I met in the archives. And this is a leadership directory from 1964, which is 60 years ago. And Wally was an elder then, so I'd love to have him to be here and tell us what it was like then. But we can always visit him. So he's
No, maybe he can watch the
he, well. So I guess.
And one more thing. Regarding the Tokyo Olympics, Paul Fukuda was not the real TUC member back then, but he used to work for the Hitachi New York branch and came back to Japan with Julia. And Paul-san organized the international kind of a welcoming conference or party or whatever here in TUC that I heard from Paul-san directly.
I see that we held the memorial service for U.S. Ambassador Joseph Grew. Would you say our church was the church connected with the government, or there were no other American churches?
I mean, there were other American churches, but I think us being a union church kind of makes us more accessible to those who work in government. Yeah, there were military churches I guess they could go to, but they liked us.
One question about the Joseph Grew. I belong to a Tsukiji Foreign Settlement Historical Society, and Hinohara Sensei of St. Luke International Hospital chairman was our advisor, and he directly told me he was the doctor for Joseph Grew. And when they going back to U.S., Joseph Crew's wife insisted Hinohara-san to come with us, at the Yokohama harbor. And he was scared and back to Yokohama port. So is he died in Japan? I thought he was back to, Joseph Crew went back to United States.
Oh, Joseph Grew?
Yeah.
Oh, but I don't know why his memorial service was here, but I know he was involved with it.
The housing compound is named the GRU. The Embassy Housing, Joseph GRU Housing, yeah.
So my last slide for today is about West Tokyo Union Church. I got to worship there last Sunday. Pastor Jonathan gave a bilingual children's sermon, which was really fun. And I think pastors need to go. So do you want to tell us a little bit about, I guess we can talk about the history, but if you want to tell us about how history relates to the present.
Oh, okay. So, interestingly enough, archive information for West Tokyo Union Church is actually relatively limited compared to what we have at TUC. I've been trying to talk a lot more with the people who are currently there, but in contrast to TUC, where you've had your own facility for decades, centuries, in fact, WTUC is still meeting without an actual permanent home. And so some of the information that I have is kind of gathered from TUC archives. But for those of you who may know a little bit about the history of those who are not Japanese living in Japan, during the 50s, a lot of the people started to move toward the west. And we started about the westward expansion back from Tsukiji into Ginza, into Omotesando. And there was this push toward the west, especially with the international schools starting to set house over toward the western side of Tokyo. So in the process, the leadership of the church at TUC, starting in the 50s, started to consider what are we going to do for those who live out west? Because, I mean, it's a trek here. It takes here from Mitakashi, it takes about 45 minutes to an hour. And so with that consideration, what shall we do? And so the decision was to consider starting at least a West Tokyo meeting or gathering, which started officially in 1963. That was the first time that the worship was held together over in the west side of Tokyo. And the congregation was officially founded in 1965. There was a lot of debate. If you look at some of the stuff from Hempel's book, you'll read about how there was a debate. Is West Tokyo Union Church a West Tokyo campus of TUC? Is it its own, independent, particularized church? Is it something in the middle? And so at first, initially, the pastors at TUC had a responsibility to care for those in West Tokyo. Even though there were pastors that were assigned to West Tokyo Union Church, the pastors here also had care that was required for those living there. On top of that, the membership question mark was always there too. Are you a member of TUC or WTUC? And constitutionally, I don't know if it's ever been fully resolved, but at the time, if you're a member of TUC, you're a member of WTUC and vice versa. And I don't know if that question has ever been addressed. Like starting in the 70s, I believe, I have to double check my sources, but in the 70s, the church council here gave WTUC the ability to make some of those decisions on their own, the steering committee and their ability to have memberships there. But they never actually, from my understanding, settled the question whether they are separate or still part here. So it's an interesting question that still lingers today. You mentioned about the 60s and how it was a turbulent time. WTUC originally started to meet at International Christian University, ICU, for a period of time. But then there were protests that took place at the same time, and so that's when the relationship with Japan Lutheran College and Theological Seminary developed, which was next door. And so they moved there after that protest and have been meeting there ever since. So we're still gathering over at WTUC at Japan Lutheran College and Seminary on a semi-regular basis. The pandemic really impacted the church, and so we went completely online for about 2-3 years and actually did not have a pastor during that time period. And then only recently have we started going monthly, and now twice a month we're meeting in person with the other services being met online. Interestingly enough, Howard Haynes, who used to be pastor here, also served as pastor at West Tokyo Union Church in the early part of the 1980s, about a summer, I don't know if it's a year, but definitely a summer he was serving there, and there were also a lot of exchanges still taking place between the two congregations. And so WTUC would not exist if TUC did not exist, and if TUC did not have this desire to look forward into the future, to think about those living in the western part of Tokyo, then WTC would not exist, certainly in the form that it is today. So we're certainly grateful for that. Yes, sir.
A couple of points. One of the reasons that the movement west was the government had restrictions on the height of buildings because of earthquakes. They didn't have the technology to build over five or six stories. So there's no place to go but west. And also the American mentality of the suburbs. Everybody's going to move to the suburbs.
Sure.
Another point, we bought our property from ICU. The property that we owned out there that funded this church was bought from ICU. And it's still a problem with the members of West Tokyo Union there. They feel they got hurt because we took their property away from them.
Yeah, there was. I need to give you a copy of that document sometimes. I received it as well because, and thank you so much for sharing that because, yeah, there was this discussion about TUC owning the property for the purposes of WTUC possibly using it as a manse or as a facility, build a church, and ended up. But I also heard, and you may need to correct me on this, but I also heard on top of the fact that it was sold to fund this place, there's also a push from the government there as well because they also wanted to build something out there. And so there was also that pressure, from what I hear, for the church TUC to also sell that. Is that correct? Do you recall that at all?
It became a park.
Yes.
The metropolitan government of Tokyo
Right.
made it a park. They just wanted property to make a park, that's all.
Right.
It wasn't a lot of pressure, no.
It wasn't a lot of pressure, though. Okay, all right.
That entire park was owned by
The one next to ASIJ.
that entire park.
Well, no, not the entire park, no. A portion of it.
Sorry,
The
let's.
government was
Can I
expanding.
pause and then sorry, let's pause and wrap up with a prayer quickly because they need to go. Okay, and then those of us who want to do Q&A can stay. Holy God, we thank you for walking with us for the past 152 years. May our history past illumine our present and inspire our future. And may our history help us to discern your providence in the unfolding of our destiny. We offer these prayers in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you all for coming. I can stay for Q&A, but then thank you, pastors. Ooh, 3 pastors. This is the historical record.